Welcome to the Friday edition of One's World, and today I'm going to talk about a subject that's very dear to my heart, which is education and teaching in particular. And I'm doing this because I've been in conversation with the Dean of Social Sciences and Humanities at the Royal University of Phnom Penh about the possibility of helping out with some of the graduate student initiatives, including a new PhD program in Khmer Studies. And I've been put on the committee for a new PhD candidate, and I'm going to try to help with some faculty development and so forth. And yesterday at lunch the Dean said, okay, I want you to write me a position paper. 2 pages, he said. I didn't ask him whether single or double spaced. 2 pages position paper on the state of education in Cambodia today and what my recommendations are for improvement. Which is an awful challenge, given that I'm not really all that conversant with education at all levels here. I certainly don't know anything about primary and secondary education. I know a little bit about university education, colleges, I've taught here a little bit. So I said, okay, and I ended up writing a 3-page single-spaced paper, which among other things compared Cambodia today with South Australia of the 1950s and 60s when I was there. Back in the 1950s, the Australian government had what was called the assisted travel program. I don't remember the exact name. In England, it was, well, in Australia, really, the people who arrived using assisted passage were called 5-pound POMs, POM being the Australian name for English people, like from POM meaning pommy, but meaning POM. I don't know where the slang comes from. It means apple in French. Don't know, but anyway, we were called pommies or POMs. The 5-pound POMs were the people who travelled on the assisted passage on usually P&O liners. We travelled there on P&O liner, the Orsova. £5 per adult and free passage for children. But if you're a teacher, the Australian government paid the £5. So essentially it was free because they needed teachers desperately, because they didn't have enough trained teachers, particularly at the secondary level. At the school that I went to for high school, I think there were maybe around 30 teachers, and possibly about 5 of them had bachelor's degrees, and the rest of them went to teacher training colleges. And what the Australian government wanted to do was raise that level up so that there were more teachers with bachelor's degrees. And the simplest way to do it was to import them from Europe, mostly from England. So my father booked passage for the family. So myself, my mother, my 2 sisters and I all travelled completely free from London to Adelaide. It took several weeks. Fascinating voyage through the Mediterranean, Suez Canal, down across to Sri Lanka, and then down to Perth, and then across to Adelaide. Still very vivid in my memory. And they needed that to raise the level of the teacher quality, because a country's economy is really linked to its educational system. And so many things are dependent on the ability to educate the population. And this is a big sore spot with me right now, particularly in the relation to the US and to the United Kingdom. But right now I'm concerned about Southeast Asia. So I want to start with a story from my teaching days in Myanmar, and we'll work from there. I was teaching in Italy, mostly teaching English as a foreign language in the afternoons at a public school. But then in the mornings I was teaching a variety of subjects, including computer science, history, a little bit of chemistry, a lot of English literature. Surprising how much English literature, starting in the upper levels with Chaucer and Shakespeare and whatnot. So, you know, a mixed bag. But I was not particularly content in Italy, and so I decided that I wanted to spend some time in Myanmar, particularly in Mandalay. Kind of Kipling-esque, you know. I know the road to Mandalay. It's kind of romantic. Thought, yeah, I'd like to live in Mandalay. So I got a job in Mandalay teaching science to primary school students and middle school students, which was wonderful. And my goal, very simply, was to inspire curiosity. That one of the big problems with education all over the world, but certainly in Asia and especially in China, is the dominance of rote learning. Just give the students their lesson for the day, which they learn, and when they've had enough rote learning, they get tested, and the questions are all predictable because they're all based on the rote learning, and then they go back to more rote learning, which is a terrible system. But in China, they've been doing it for thousands of years. The imperial examinations were just endless rote learning. They used to say at Oxford that the hardest exam in the world was the Chinese imperial exam, which started with write down everything you know. And the second exam was write down everything you don't know. I mean, it wasn't quite like that, but it's certainly in that vein, that the more characters you knew in writing, the more educated you were considered to be, and so forth. And the more philosophy and poetry that you had memorized, the more skillful you were considered to be. But rote learning, you know, is important, and I would say that largely based on educators like Piaget, that there are different kinds of learning for different stages, and that when you're very young, they're just like absorbing information is really important. Like you can't learn to read and write without learning your alphabet and sounds, and you just have to learn them. There's no way around it. But you need to have a spark of curiosity. Otherwise, you're not going to keep going. I mean, you'll learn how to read and write and how to add and subtract and multiply and so forth. Like, that's all fairly basic. But how do you get beyond that? You need curiosity. And here's my story, and it's probably my favorite teaching moment of my entire life. All right, and I've been teaching for nearly 50 years. I was teaching light in, I think they were the oldest primary level students, I believe, I'm not sure, maybe some 10 or 11 years old. And we were talking about sources of light. And we talked about how like incandescent bulbs could produce light, and fire could produce light, and sun and stars could produce light. All good. And I also pointed out that the moon does not produce light. It reflects light from the sun. That's a little bit hard for people to understand, but given enough prompting and explanation, they can understand it, because they can also then understand how the phases of the moon work. That when the moon is in certain relation to the sun and the earth, it's full or half or crescent or gibbous or whatever, because it's reflecting the light of the sun. And then one day, this is my big moment, a student put up her hand and she said, "Why, if the moon reflects the light of the sun, why is the moon white when the sun is yellow?" And I just went, wow, what an amazing question. And I was about to answer when another girl in the class put up her hand and said, "The moon is white because the sun is white." And that was just like an explosion. I mean, I was just blown away. That's something that I guarantee, if I asked most of my undergraduates that in New York, they wouldn't be able to answer, any more than they would be able to tell me why the sky is blue or why the sun is yellow. They don't fully comprehend, they may comprehend in part, but not totally, that the light from the sun is white. Like that's the whole essence of experiments that Isaac Newton did on breaking light up using a prism into red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, violet, and discovering that the composition of white light is all of those colors together. Well, how can it be white light unless the sun is white, right? I mean, because all the other stars, well, not all the others, I mean, some of them are red and some of them are blue, but a great number of them are white, and our sun is white. It appears yellow because of the combination of scattering of light and refraction in the atmosphere. And at different times it's actually different colors, like sometimes it's red, sometimes it's yellow, sometimes it's orange. It depends on its angle in the sky in relation to the atmosphere, and so on and so forth. But I was just blown away because both of those students were really thinking. They were taking the information that I had given them and saying, "But hold on, something doesn't make sense here. If the moon is reflecting the sun and I see the sun as yellow, then why isn't the moon yellow? And the fact is that sometimes it is, or it can be red. I mean, it can be a lot of different colors. It's not red very often, but it is red sometimes. It's called a blood moon. And that's the essence of education, is getting students to start exercising their brains. Because information can be found in books or on the internet. Right? Teaching is not about conveying information. If you want to know anything about the geography of Central Asia or the history of Scotland or whatever, you can look it up in a book. What you can't learn in books is curiosity and critical thinking. That's what teaching is about, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there's an awful lot of teachers who think it's just about conveying information, as if like they're the big repositories of information, and if they like spill it out from their full brains into the empty brains of their students, and they'll fill up the brains of their students, and that will be successful. It's not successful at all. As many scholars, writers, philosophers have said, the most important things in life cannot be taught. And critical thinking and curiosity are two of the most important ones. All you can do as a teacher is do your best to show your students how you ramble through a problem, how you think through it, how you use your own curiosity, and why you use your own curiosity and critical thinking. Like that it enriches your life. But I don't know how successful I've been in the course of my teaching career. Moderately. I think that a great many of my students don't get it. They don't understand that education is any more than absorbing the information that comes from the teacher, because that's what they're used to. And they often don't know what to make of me, because I ask them things like, what is 2? Or more importantly, I've often asked them, prove to me that 2 + 2 = 4. And usually what they'll do is they'll say, okay, 2, 2, 4. And I'll say, no. I didn't ask you whether 2 fingers and 2 fingers make 4 fingers. I asked you whether 2 + 2 = 4. And usually at that point, most of them just say, he's gone bonkers. What's he talking about? Because I'm not asking about 2 things. I'm asking about the nature of 2 itself. What is twoness? And this is an issue that mathematicians struggle with and don't have a very good answer for. They have answers, but like one of them is that 2 is the successor of 1. A big help. But I wonder sometimes, like, why do different cultures count in different ways? In Cambodia, for example, in the Khmer language, we count in 5s. The way to count is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Moi, bi, bai, bon, bra. 5 + 1, that's 6. 5 + 2, 5 + 3, 5, so forth. So they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 plus 1, 5 plus 2, 5 plus 3, all up to 10, and then start again. Why do they count in fives? Is it because we have 5 fingers? Not really sure. Why do we count in tens? Not really sure, but it could be because we've got 10 fingers. Why did the Babylonians count in 60s? Why are there also counting systems in 12s? When I grew up in Australia and in England, the money system involved 12 pence to the shilling. And we also bought eggs in dozens. Makes perfect sense. So if one egg costs, let's say, 2 pence, tuppence, then a dozen eggs costs 2 shillings. You know, so 2 pence for 1, 2 shillings for 12, because there's 12 pennies in a shilling and 12 eggs in a dozen. So 12. Why 12? Why dozens? Why don't they sell eggs in dozens in Asia? Yeah, when I get eggs in a pack here, they come in packs of 10, which makes perfect sense if you've got a decimal system. Asking questions is really, really important. So I'll leave you with something that I'm probably going to elaborate on maybe next week sometime. I'm fascinated by the color blue. And one of the things that fascinates me is the fact that was first discovered by the Prime Minister of England, 19th century Prime Minister, Gladstone, who found that in most classical languages there is no word for the color blue. In classical Greek, for example, there's no word for the color blue. That when Homer was writing about the ocean, he couldn't describe it as blue because he didn't have a word for it. He usually used a collocation which is translated as wine dark, the wine dark sea. Why? Why? We've got a blue sky, we've got blue seas, oceans, lakes, rivers. Why don't we have a word for the color blue? That's question number 1. Or why didn't they? Question number 2. Where does the color blue exist? And that's a very complicated question to answer, because I mean, the short answer is the color blue exists in our minds, because we perceive light through our eyes, which are processed by cones in our retina, and then the information is transmitted to our brains and interpreted in our brains. And if you have malfunctioning cones, then you may not be able to perceive the color blue. All very complicated, because we're saying that reality is not out there, it's in here. And it can change if what's in here changes. And that's part of my job, to change what's in here. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for the moment. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope I didn't tax your brains too much. And I'll come back next week and ponder these things a little more deeply. Enjoy your weekend.